Johann Sebastien Bach was a German composer from the 17th century. He was born in 1685 in Eisenach to a musical family and died in Leipzig in 1750 at the age of 65. Considered to be one of the greatest composers of all time, he excelled at instrumental as well as large choral or vocal works. During his life, he was considered a brilliant organist and also an accomplished violinist. His massive amount of work was catalogued in 1950 by Wolfgang Schmieder, calling it the Bach Works Catalogue. Using the German name, you will always see a BWV and a number after each one of his works. He had only limited reception to his music during his life and became widely known after his death during the Bach revival in the 1800s, led by composer Felix Mendelssohn, again in the 1900s with the advancement of recorded music. He was originally buried in Old St. John's Cemetery, but later moved around due to the bombings of World War II. When Bach was alive, commonly known as the Baroque period, musicians would work for either the court or the church. Your boss was either a prince or the local church, which was usually controlled by the town council. Your job was to write music for their services or the receptions. Every week you had to come up with new music and write it out for each musician you had available to you. The quality of musicians varied depending on the status of your employer, and so you wrote for the ability of what was available to you. The more money they had, the better the musicians. This also required a massive amount of music over the years of service. You worked for your employer until they allowed you to leave. You didn't have the option of going wherever you pleased. Bach found himself in trouble several times, and eventually in jail at one point because of his reluctance to conform. J.S. Bach's professional life is broken up into three periods: Weimar, Cothen, and Leipzig. Each period signifies the employer and the town he lived in at the time. At Weimar, Bach started as an organist and eventually moved up to concertmaster. Here he wrote mostly organ music as well as cantatas. It was at Weimar that he began the famous Well-Tempered Clavier, a collection of preludes and fugues in every key. After trying to leave the court and move on, he was jailed for a month and then finally relieved of his duties with an unfavorable discharge. In Cothen, J.S. Bach was employed as director of music for Prince Leopold, a fan of Bach's music who had lured him away from his original post. His compositions became less strict, and it was no longer directed only for the church. He embraced dance music, writing orchestral and cello suites, as well as works for solo instruments such as lute and violin. It was Cothen that produced the Brandenburg concertos. Wanting a higher profile position, Bach applied to be cantor in Leipzig and was offered the job only after it was turned down by George Telemann. Along with sacred work for multiple churches in town, Bach was required also to instruct the students at the school. This would lead to his instructional Goldberg variations and his later published Art of Fugue. It was during this period that he composed his Mass in B minor in an attempt to convince the prince to appoint him as court composer. Bach's health, including his eyesight, began to rapidly decline. He died in 1850 following complications from unsuccessful eye surgery. There are countless in-depth musical and theoretical reasons that Bach is considered so important and is mandatory studying in all levels of music education. The essence of what we can take away from his life and work was his music was composed with purpose. Everything he wrote was for a reason. He composed to teach himself. He composed as required by his job in the church, and he composed to teach those that followed him. He also didn't restrict his writing because of the limitations of what was available to him. He used what he had at his disposal to create masterpieces, regardless if he had a full orchestra and choir or just a piece of manuscript, a pen, and his imagination. Every time we hear any music today, no matter the style, classical, pop, jazz, hip-hop, or metal, it all has elements from the work of Johann Sebastien Bach. Melody, rhythm, and harmony all working together to create a singular piece of music that inspires and moves us.